Welcome back to News Talk here on News Channel 8. I'm Bruce DePoit. Let's get straight back to our conversation with D.C. Councilman Charles Allen, a Democrat. He represents Ward 6 on the council. We were talking at the end of the last segment about Metro. It's the perfect transition to the streetcar discussion, which has been it's been a painful process, and there's been a lot of money invested, and right now the city has nothing to show for it. What is causing? I mean, we're seeing the testing. The testing along the H Street line continues. When does the thing open?
Yeah, painful is right. It has been just kind of calamity after calamity. It's been very frustrating. As somebody who's very supportive of the idea around a streetcar to help connect our city and connect our neighborhoods, what I think I've really seen is a failure of the Department of Transportation previously to kind of get this thing going. I have been impressed with the new DDOT director, Director Dorms Joe, who has kind of taken a steely eye at the entire system, he's actually hired and brought in experts from other streetcar lines around the country who have gotten these things up and running, and they've done it well. And so I do have a lot of confidence. Every time I ask him, when are we going to cut this ribbon? When are we going to get this thing rolling with passengers? He's not going to give a date. And
what's the holdup?
He's not going to give a date because he says I don't want to miss a date because we've missed how many deadlines by now. So he says I'm only going to give you a date when I have confidence that it can run. I have told him my expectation is it's got to be this year. I think severe alarm bells should be going off if we can't get this thing up and running. I've seen a lot of activity. I don't live too far off that corridor, so I see it on a pretty regular basis. The testing has increased. They've been making a lot of the repairs from the findings when they had the peer review come in to kind of identify what were those big problems that still remained. So I've seen them take a lot of positive steps. I feel like we're all having our fingers crossed and hoping.
But is this like a kid who can't get out of 4th grade because he keeps flunking the exams that he needs to move on? Are there issues with the testing? Have they been able to?
Well, I'll give you one example. So when they came in to review it, they found out that the initial contractor hadn't built the platforms at exactly the right height, and that created a conflict so that when the streetcar pulled up, anybody who was going to be in a wheelchair or in a walker was going to have a hard time getting from that platform onto the train. So DDOT had to come in and make those repairs. Those are the types of things that they came in to really bring a level of specificity and expertise to make sure that little things like that were going to work. They found some railings that had been cracked, which is a very normal thing for rails to have happen over time, but the maintenance hadn't taken effect to make sure that they were preventing that and replacing it as necessary. Those are the types of things that DDOT has to get right, and I'm seeing them work on them very hard to have this up and running.
Are taxpayers going to pay full freight for a system that has had so many failings? Is anyone talking yet about cost, about financial givebacks, or making the taxpayer whole in some way so that, if we're not going to get a Cadillac, let's not be paying for one?
Yeah. You know what? I think if you take a look at what Atlanta did, when Atlanta launched their streetcar, you rode it for free. I think it was about 6 months or so that you rode the streetcar for free. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar in the district, but DDOT's going to have to work all that out and come up with a plan. What I as frustrating as the current line has been, part of my expectation is to also be looking at how this isn't just a novelty ride up and down H Street, but to actually be the transit connection that we want and need, which is both to the east and to the west downtown. And that's part of the conversation we have to have as well.
Is this experience with the bulky rollout of the H Street streetcar line, in terms of its impact on some of the thinking and some of the discussion that existed, particularly toward the end of Mayor Gray's tenure, that this is kind of a great way for residents and visitors to be able to get around different parts of the city, not just in this one area. So is the takeaway that maybe the streetcar has been overpromised in terms of what it can deliver, or that we're going to learn so much from this that the other lines where it's been talked about are going to be kind of a snap comparatively?
Well, I think without question it is the bungles have drained the enthusiasm, but I think that where people have lost faith is actually with the city's ability to implement it. A streetcar is proven time and time again to be a transit connector to help support businesses. By putting on a rail rather than on bus, you do help make a huge investment in local economic development. And we've certainly seen that along the H Street corridor with over hundreds of new businesses and thousands of new jobs created, where I think the lack of confidence is with the city's ability to execute. And that's why I work so hard with the DDOT director to make sure that he can deliver.
I'm remiss in not having given out the phone number several minutes ago, so if you want to comment on any of the issues that we've discussed so far here on News Talk with D.C. Councilman Charles Allen, or on any of the other issues that we might hit in the moments that follow, grab an open line and we'll get to your question or comment as soon as we possibly can. The number is already at the bottom of the screen, so dial now, 703-387-1020. We can take calls in the 11 a.m. hour, so if that's when you're watching, if you want to join the discussion, please do. 703-387-1020, again, is our number. Can I get your thoughts on the Pepco-Exelon merger? It received green light after green light after green light until it got to the district when regulators said, no, we don't think this is a good deal. We're told, however, that discussions are still ongoing between Pepco and Exelon and the city. Is this can this be made a good deal if it isn't at present?
I think it's a pretty high bar to make it a good deal. I came out in opposition to this merger early on. Several of us on the council did. And I was really, frankly, impressed with the Public Service Commission's rejection of that deal. It was not a good deal for our city, for our ratepayers. And more than anything, it wasn't a good deal for the city in terms of thinking through not just what our power needs are today, but what are our power needs a generation from now. And that's where this decision will really have a lasting impact. One rebate check to a ratepayer feels good for the moment, but that's not what this should really be about. It's the question of how are we in the best position to have our energy production, have our energy resiliency established, not for tomorrow or next year or even the next few years, but really a generation from now. That's the type of decision this type of merger is really going to impact. It's a big deal.
Give us your thinking into where we are and whether some of the substantive issues, not the one-time, as you said, the one-time considerations that might be nice in the moment but aren't satisfying or appropriate long-term. What do you think this discussion going on now is about, and can we get a fairer deal, a better deal?
Yeah, well, Exelon, which is a company based in Chicago, it's not a local company. Part of what the conversations have been around, for example, when we want to think about our energy use and resiliency long-term. So when we think about a major event that takes place, a hurricane that comes up the bay, a derecho like we had a couple of years ago, do we have what's called a microgrid? Do we have the ability to have our energy system in a way that the entire thing doesn't crash? Exelon in the past has been somebody who has really opposed innovating and having new technologies come in. And Pepco, while we've had to sometimes drag them kicking and screaming, they've been a partner on some of that. And that's the fears that we lose that type of partnership with a local entity by having an Exelon who has a track record of not being the best partner in this respect.
Can you comment on the fire chief's plan to have private ambulance service sort of step up and step in and help DCFD at a time when the calls for service are high and really taxing the personnel and the equipment that the city has at the moment?
Absolutely. The calls for service continue to go up, and they are predominantly for medical reasons. It's not necessarily the fire. And so the proposal from the chief, who I have a lot of respect for, this is a really accomplished guy who ran a system in Seattle very well, is to have a private and third-party ambulance system handle the basic life support transport. So we would still have our advanced life support, and then we separate our transport in two categories: advanced life support, a heart attack, a basic life support transport, which is more of a cough or a wheeze and you need to get to the hospital, but it's not that level of urgency. And what happens is, currently DC Fire and EMS transport everybody for everything, and we've seen response times suffer. And when you're that urgent situation, you need to know that they can get to you quickly. And his proposal is about trying to find a way to lessen the burden on that advanced life support and find these third-party people who can come in to help with the basic life support. We have a lot of questions around it to make sure it's done right. It's a big change. It's a big deal if we make this take place. All questions around transport time, liability, making sure the patients are taken care of, and that's some of the questions we're asking right now.
Do you have a sense from either an official briefing or just a gut sense from having been around DC government for a while, what percentage of calls for an ambulance are really inappropriate in terms of they should just be hop in a cab, drive yourself, get a ride from a friend, take metro, take the bus, whatever, but just because you're going to the hospital doesn't mean you're entitled to an ambulance. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't have the convenience that they want. We all want what we want. But when an infant dies because there are no ambulances available to take a critical patient to the hospital in as fast as humanly possible, we're talking about serious, the most real trade-offs imaginable. So I'm not trying to be mean to people.
No, but that's why we're really wrestling with this. There are people who call the ambulance right now because they need a ride to the hospital to refill a prescription. That is not why you should be in an ambulance. But that's the way it works right now. And that's where a basic life support could come in. What I've been asking the chief is, how could you...
Sorry to interrupt, but we're running short on time. Is there a way, and I know no one wants to absorb personal liability or potentially bring shame or controversy to their agency, but is there a way to tell someone who calls the ambulance to get a prescription renewed, I'm sorry, this is not the appropriate use of a critical public resource?
Well, they typically don't call to say they want a prescription refilled. It's usually something else, and then they get the refill while there. But what we need to do, if we're going to contract out these services, is to have that private provider be able to report back and work with our managed care organizations, because every managed care organization actually has free rides to the hospital for prescription refills. They have the ability to get people to their doctor. In many cases, they'll mail you the prescription. It's about educating our patients, educating folks to not use these really valuable support services that we need with our ambulances, and instead find other ways. And that's part of what we have a managed care company for.
I mentioned Vince Gray, former D.C. Mayor Vince Gray, a second ago when we were talking about streetcar. There's talk about him mounting a comeback. Do you think that could happen? Are you hearing that discussion as well?
It's D.C. politics. Anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Would you, given his expertise, would you welcome him back? Or does the cloud that existed while he was mayor cause you to think, you know what, maybe this isn't the right time?
I'm not sure if it's the right time. I think he'd be a formidable candidate no matter what, but I'm not sure if it's the right time. But anything's possible in D.C.
We have seen that over the years, haven't we? D.C. Councilman Charles Allen, he's a Democrat who represents Ward 6, Capitol Hill and beyond. Thank you very much for your time today.
Absolutely.
Good to have you
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll have you back. A quick check of the hour's top stories and the work week forecast. It's all coming your way straight ahead. And then we'll break down Washington's big win over the Eagles. And joining us is Tom Throckmorton.